Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathaniel. I particularly love movies, and I want to share that with you. From the horrifying to the terrifying, the spine-chilling to the hair-raising, along with the straight-up disgusting. WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around, and we'll leave you with a movie that will make your blood run cold.
88.1 The Burg, your mortifying music central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, and I will be the host of the show tonight as we talk about horror movies, as we did last week and we shall do next week to celebrate the spooky month of October. Tonight, we are going to be exploring a series of horror movies that are a new favorite of mine, more so that I watched all movies in the trilogy, and I was like, yeah, I love them just as much as I was expecting them to. These movies went on to define the director and his style and his overall presence in the cinematic industry until he directed Spider-Man. Yes, tonight we are talking about Sam Raimi's trilogy, the original Evil Dead movies. That consisting of the original Evil Dead from 1981, Evil Dead 2 from 1987, and Army of Darkness from 1992. I recently watched these movies over the weekend, or at least a couple of them. I've already seen the first one before, so I decided to go back and watch Evil Dead 2 and finally watch Army of Darkness, and I'll get ahead of myself if I start talking about what I thought about them. So why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll jump into the original The Evil Dead. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Evil Dead from 1981, available to watch now on Tubi. The basic plotline of the original Evil Dead follows 5 young adults who go on a trip to a cabin in the middle of the woods because they are young adults and they see nothing irresponsible or reckless about going to a cabin in the middle of the woods. At any rate, in this cabin, they end up finding a book in the cellar. Next to that book, they find a tape recorder. And while playing the tape recorder, they learn that the tape on the tape recorder, more specifically, is basically transcribing the passages of this mysterious book. And through the course of time, they learn that the book is in fact called the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, otherwise known as the Book of the Dead. Coincidentally, not in relation to them finding out and playing out the reading passages of the Necronomicon, members of the group, 4 of them more specifically, end up being possessed by demons. Okay, and the 5th member, Ash, played by Bruce Campbell, must basically deal with the fact that all of his friends are now possessed by demons. Again, it's a complete coincidence that they started reading out or having a tape recorder read out the translations of the Book of the Dead, right? It's totally just no, it's very much related. It's exactly related. That's exactly what happens. So, right off the bat, I gotta get into one of my favorite things about this movie. Let me tell you, the setting and the premise are perfect for it. Imagine this. A group of young adults who are all very stupid decide to go on a vacation in the middle of the woods in a cabin. I'm with you right there. Okay, they get there and they find a mythical book called the literal Book of the Dead, right? Okay, sure, fine. There's definitely probably a Book of the Dead out there somewhere. H.P. Lovecraft did exist. And they read it off, or they have someone translate it out through tape recording. Okay, sure. Then they start getting possessed. Right. Okay, why aren't they leaving the cabin yet? Well, you see, the woods are also messed up because it's a magic book. Yeah, I'm following you still. I'm still following you. The premise itself is just such an easy thing to wrap your head around. It's like, okay, group of teenagers are in the woods, not even teenagers, like 20-year-olds. It doesn't matter how old they are. They're stupid for going to a cabin in the middle of the woods, and they kind of deserve these consequences but not to the extent that they do end up getting it. They at least deserve to be knocked about for doing something so incredibly irresponsible. So I'm following along with you, and I'm tracking with you. And more specifically, and more importantly, it allows for a good horror story. Because imagine being trapped in a cabin while all your friends are turning into demons. That's pretty spooky. That's objectively really spooky, especially for someone whose brain clearly hasn't matured enough quite yet. So that's my main, first praise I gotta give the original Evil Dead. The other thing that I will say about this location and this premise is it allows the movie to be filmed for very cheap. I normally wouldn't bring that into the equation all that much, but it's important to realize that the original Evil Dead, more than a lot of horror movies, especially even on the level of something like the Blair Witch Project, is often heralded for being a miraculous thing that exists in the first place. More so, a miracle that it even exists in the first place. Keep in mind, made in 1981 for a budget of around $250,000, right? Not even breaking $1 million, not even close to $1 million. And they were having to run back and forth. Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, and their other associated friend who was definitely working on the movie, who I didn't research his name. I will have that at some point. At any rate, they ended up having to run back to town at least 3 times to get people from town to continue to fund their movie, right? They're out in the middle of the woods in a random cabin filming in harsh conditions. How did this movie see the light of day, and how is it as good as it is? It's a miracle. That's exactly the explanation that a lot of people give to it, including Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell. They're just like, yeah, we were just happy that we were done with it. So, there. And honestly, for a movie that's just, supposed to kind of wow you over by the fact that it exists in the first place, it does that and then some. It manages to feel incredibly claustrophobic, incredibly horrifying, just a simple premise that is conveyed throughout the entire thing without losing a whole lot of steam. I was on the edge of my seat while watching this movie the first time around, and the only time I've seen it thus far. There is only one complaint that I have about it, which is that, notoriously, it's a bit overdone. By overdone, I mean it is brutal. Extremely brutal. Just the way the blood looks itself on screen, it's I didn't realize it had that consistency. That's horrifying. And it sometimes works against it, in my opinion. For those of you who have seen the movie, the tree scene did not need to be there. That's all I'm going to say. If you don't know the context to it, and you're not really up for very brutal and gruesome horror movies, I wouldn't necessarily recommend watching The Evil Dead to know what I'm talking about. Maybe just read the synopsis of the thing. But the tree scene did not need to be in the movie. Thankfully, what follows after the original Evil Dead is, in my opinion, one of the best sequels you could possibly ask for. Evil Dead 2 follows it after the fact, and after the break, we will jump directly into Evil Dead 2. So stick around.
88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays.
And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Evil Dead 2 from 1987, available to watch now on Plex. So, basic premise, Ash, a member of the friend group from the last movie, or in fact the only surviving member of the group from the last movie, ends up going on vacation with his girlfriend to a remote cabin in the middle of the woods. He then finds, in this cabin on a desk somewhere, he finds this book, and he finds a tape recorder next to it. He starts playing the tape recorder and learns that the book is currently being translated. It is referred to as the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, otherwise known as the Book of the Dead. And then his girlfriend ends up getting possessed by a demon. Okay. For those of you who have never seen Evil Dead 2, and have never done any research, you're asking a very valid question right now. Isn't that just the plot of the first movie again, but with less other people besides Ash? Yes. But good news! That plotline only happens for the first 7 minutes of Evil Dead 2. Immediately after that, Ash is attacked by an evil being. He ends up becoming possessed, but then ends up surviving because it randomly turns to day very quickly, because I think the forest is just like, it's got like an extended day, like an extended nighttime where it's like, it's constantly night, but it has to be like day for about 5 seconds. Or it's just plot convenience. I think it's plot convenience if I'm being completely honest, but I'm fine with it. The plot is convenient and the plot is still good, so might as well be convenient for it. At any rate, he is then possessed, and then he has to deal with other characters showing up at the cabin that were never in the first movie, and so it kind of divulges in its own pathway. And if I'm remembering quite correctly, I remember seeing an interview with Bruce Campbell where he basically said what ended up happening is they had to have the first 7 minutes in there because they wanted to recap the first movie, but they didn't own the first movie, so they basically recapped the entire thing in the span of 7 minutes and didn't explain that to people, so they thought he was just going to the cabin in the middle of the woods again with a different person and not learning his lesson, when in reality what's actually happening is it's a continuation of the first movie. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. So let's move on from the plot line of Evil Dead 2 and talk about one of my opinions on Evil Dead 2. It's the best in the trilogy. I love Evil Dead 2 a lot more than the first movie. I think it is better than the first movie, mostly because it doesn't have the tree scene, but also because it's just like, it walks that line of horror comedy just right. The original movie is a great horror movie. Dare I say, one of the best I've seen. I appreciate its dedication to being a strictly horror movie. It's just that for my taste personally, and in terms of doing something with its story and its characters and its setting, I think it being half comedy, half horror works so well, because keep in mind that this is like demonic possession. You can go multiple ways with that. You can have it be this horrifying thing. The way they do it with this movie is, sure, like someone's currently being possessed by a demon and it's horrifying, but they're also just like engaging in literal slapstick humor, just smacking Ash across the face and just like dancing all around trying to mess with him. And it's like, I don't entirely hate the direction they're going with. Like, you could hate it, or you could have fun with it. If you're a person who likes to have fun, you have fun with it. And if you're a person who likes to ruin their enjoyment of a movie, then you don't have fun with it. And by extension, you don't like the movie. So you're not having fun. What's the point of watching a movie if you're not going to have fun? That's my big point. Alongside it, I think as a story and as character development piece, character development piece, it's interesting to look at it from the perspective of Ash being the central focus point. Because keep in mind, I barely mentioned him in my review of the first movie because he's not really brought up in the first movie. Bruce Campbell, sure, was friends with Sam Raimi, and he was playing one of the characters who went to the cabin. And yes, he is the only surviving member. But at the same time, he's not really the main focus. There are other people who divert the attention away from him, more so what feels like intentionally near the beginning of the first movie. There's other members of the group that seem to be more important before they're inevitably possessed. In this movie, in this one, Evil Dead 2, it feels like from the very start, it's established that Ash is the one you're supposed to follow, because it's just him and his girlfriend. And you stick with him for most of the first act, so that when other people start showing up, they're like, oh, they're on collision course to intersect with Ash in his story currently. They're not the main characters that we are now being introduced to. They're very clearly not diverting attention to trick you into thinking they're the main characters. They're just there to benefit Ash and his now the main character of the story, or his story that he's now the main character of, however you want to say it in the correct order. I apparently don't like saying things in the correct order tonight, but that's completely fine. I should also mention that this one is got a significantly higher budget, and for that reason they can really have fun with it. They really tried to make it as goofy as possible and film in some other locations besides just the cabin, but the focus is mainly on the cabin. You can really see the difference because it kind of loses that like cheap sort of, I guess, lower quality film stock feel of the original movie, which was a positive in the movie, and kind of goes with its higher effects budget to make more slapstick moments and make some more goofier scenes and make something that's like a little bit more, I guess, involved. And it really shows. And I really appreciate that they got a higher budget. But, and this is a big but, I'm glad that they got a bigger budget for Evil Dead 2. But I'm even more glad that they got enough budget to make a sequel to both the original and Evil Dead 2. This sequel is known as Army of Darkness, and it will be our last movie on the watch list tonight. After the break, we shall jump into Army of Darkness, and you will hear my opinions on it, so stick around.
88.1 The Burg, your music central.
Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Army of Darkness from 1992, available to watch now on Amazon Prime. So, basic plotline is as follows. After the original Evil Dead, or not the original Evil Dead, more so, after Evil Dead 2, more directly, Ash is sent back to the Middle Ages. And he is forced to confront the demons of the Necronomicon and his own undead clone in those medieval times. So you're probably asking, you didn't spoil the ending of Evil Dead 2, but I didn't expect that it would take place in the Middle Ages of all things. Don't worry, it kind of makes sense. Kind of. In some of the pages of the Necronomicon, they talk about like back in the Middle Ages where they kind of had this chosen one figure who defeated all evil monsters from the Necronomicon, and it's heavily implied at the time to be Ash, and then at the end of the movie it's confirmed that it will be Ash. And so we're going to follow that storyline in Army of Darkness more specifically. Rather unfortunate that I basically have to spoil the ending of Evil Dead 2 to talk about Army of Darkness, but hey, at least they're directly connected. It's a series, so can't complain too much, I guess. And I really can't complain too much because 2 is my favorite of the trilogy. I think Evil Dead 2 is the best one. I think it does everything it sets out to accomplish in spades, and no other movie in the series can top it. Even the original kind of pales just in the slightest amount to Evil Dead 2. But, I watched Army of Darkness for the first time this weekend, and I learned that I love Army of Darkness. I love it so much. It's not my favorite, but boy, do I love it so very much. It's so funny. It's so funny. Here's the thing. It's a goofy premise to begin with. The first 2 kind of followed a very simple premise of friends or people being trapped in a cabin in the middle of the woods, and now it's guy is trapped in the Middle Ages and must still fight the exact same demons that have been haunting him for the past while, who have been like possessing all the people close to him. And now he just has to deal with that in the Middle Ages. And he has to deal with it possessing him and creating an evil clone of himself. And it's so incredibly funny that he's basically fighting an evil, rotted version of himself. And this isn't a horror movie somehow. That's the weirdest and goofiest thing about Army of Darkness. The original 2 had simple premises and were horror movies. Army of Darkness has a bonkers premise and is not horror at all. It is instead a complete slapstick adventure comedy the entire way through, and have fantasy as well because it's the Middle Ages, so we have to call it fantasy. So this is where the craziest part comes in. Would you believe me if I told you that it's actually not jarring for it to go this direction? Because it's not. It fits better than it should or has any right to be by any comparable metric by a normal person. I'm not a normal person, so let me tell you, I was pleased beyond belief and relief when I found out this movie fits into the trilogy almost perfectly. Somehow, this, even though it's not a horror movie, I think most of it comes down to the fact that Evil Dead 2 kind of introduced the opportunity for it to be all slapstick and nonsense goofy mixed in with this horror aspect of it, and they could kind of tone down the horrifying stuff and keep it more as a slapstick comedy in certain aspects. And so basically what they figured out was, okay, if we tone down the horror aspect pretty much completely, it can still stand alone as its own like goofy slapstick movie with actual jokes and real funny moments to it, where we just have Ash basically get his world rocked because he's overconfident at this point because he's dealt with these zombies before and he's gonna have to deal with them again, or more so they're called deadites if I wanted to be the actually correcting person, but I don't. And it's just like he's already dealt with these things before, so how are we gonna change it up and also have him deal with them again, and how are we gonna have this all work out? Well, he's overconfident, they're gonna still be in the Middle Ages, and now there's skeletons. I'm not complaining about any of this, I'm just listing off how they decided to work around it. And all of it works. Keep in mind that all of it works. All of it. Every single minute of it works. I legitimately have no complaints about it. Because here's my big allowance for Army of Darkness. If they were going to make a goofy, slapstick, adventure, fantasy comedy, what about that is easy for you to fit a horror movie into? What about that genre sort of compilation allows for a horror movie story? None of it. That's the point. You can't realistically squeeze horror aspects into Army of Darkness as the way it stands now without it feeling bloated or overdone or way out of its league in terms of taking itself seriously, because then it has all these goofy aspects to it. Best part is, like, it's at a great length for an adventure comedy. Only about an hour, 10 minutes. Like, if they put anything horrifying in it, it'd feel out of place. And so they just didn't. They avoided bloating the whole thing. Arguably, it could be like, oh, some of the creature designs are creepy, but there's no traditional jump scares. There's just like stuff you see coming from a mile away and things that you understand are kind of meant to be spooky, but are not really like that scary. Just more so kind of aiding in the fantasy story. Best example would be Ash fighting Evil Ash. Evil Ash is kind of spooky design-wise, but he's more so just like an evil creature that kind of services the fantasy element of the whole thing. So it's like, it works. It works in more ways than it should. Again, there's no real issues there. If you added anything else, there would suddenly be issues. It's fine as it is. I'm happy with the movie that I got, and I'm happy with the series that I got. I honestly really like the Evil Dead trilogy. And when I refer to it as that, keep in mind that I'm not including the 2013 remake and the Evil Dead Rise movie that came out, I think, last year. I didn't even like put enough effort into figuring it out, because I like Evil Dead, The Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness now so much. And I love Bruce Campbell, and I love Ash as a character, and I love all of the things they did with it, and Sam Raimi's direction, and just so many other things that I could talk about, that I didn't see any value in watching the remake and its sequel. I saw no value in it. I would not enjoy it. I can guarantee you that right now. And with that in mind, with me saying that I have a lot more that I could talk about with Evil Dead, thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Wednesdays. Be sure to tune in to What to Watch Weekends this weekend. Normally, What to Watch Weekends happens on Saturday from 8 to 10 p.m., but it's going to be pushed back since there is a football game this Saturday that will be broadcasting during that time here on the Burg instead. So What to Watch Weekends will be happening this Sunday from 8 to 10 p.m. So please do turn into that. Same place, same time, longer show, more movies, or in this case, we might be talking about the Evil Dead TV show, so keep that in mind. Please follow What to Watch Wednesdays on Instagram at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces. And with all of that being said, thank you all for listening once again. I will be back here on What to Watch Wednesdays next Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. Normal time, same place, and I'll be telling you what to watch. Good night, everybody.